a homeless woman with a dream, a billionaire longing for meaning. When Daniel steps into Emily's world, he discovers more than hardship. He finds resilience, kindness, and a truth that shakes his empire. But can love bridge the gap between riches and rags? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Emily Carter pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders as the cold winter wind swept through the alley. Another night on the sea, streets of New York City. Another night of trying to find warmth in a world that had turned its back on her. At 22, she hadn't imagined this would be her life. She settled into her usual spot behind the old bookstore, where the vent from the building's heating system provided a small measure of comfort. Pulling out her most precious possession, a beat-up smartphone she'd managed to keep charged thanks to the library's outlets, she smiled as she saw a message from Daniel. "How was your day?" his message read. Such a simple question, but it meant the world to her. For the past 3 months, Daniel had been her lifeline, someone who listened without judgment, who made her feel human again. "Cold," she typed back, "but I managed to get a sandwich from the church today. How about you?" In his penthouse office 50 blocks away, Daniel Reed stared at his phone, his finger hovering over the reply button. Around him, the evening skyline of Manhattan glittered like a sea of stars, but his attention was fixed on this simple conversation. "Just another day at work," he replied, avoiding mention of the billion-dollar deal he'd just closed or the yacht he'd ordered that morning. Something about Emily's messages had started to affect him deeply. While everyone else in his life wanted something from him, she just wanted to talk. "I saw something beautiful today," Emily wrote. "A little girl gave her cookie to a stray dog. Her mom tried to stop her, but she insisted. Sometimes I think kids understand kindness better than adults do." Daniel looked around his empty office, at the expensive artwork that meant nothing to him, and felt a tightness in his chest. Here he was, worth billions, and this homeless girl was teaching him about beauty and kindness. "Emily," he typed, then deleted it. "I wish..." He started again, then deleted that too. Finally, he wrote, "Do you ever wonder what you'd do if things were different?" The response came quickly. "Sometimes, but not about having money or fancy things. I dream about having a small bookstore cafe, nothing fancy. Just a warm place where people like me could come in, get a hot drink, read a book, and feel human for a while." Silly, right? Daniel stood up and walked to his window, looking down at the city below. Somewhere out there, Emily was huddled in an alley, sharing her dreams with a stranger she thought was just like her. "It's not silly at all," he replied. But inside, something was changing. The protective walls he'd built around himself were cracking. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. The contrast between his life and Emily's kept him awake. While he lay in his king-sized bed with imported sheets, she was out there in the cold. He'd built his tech empire by connecting people through screens, but he'd never felt more disconnected from humanity. Morning came, and with it, a decision that would change both their lives forever. Daniel cancelled all his meetings, ignored his assistant's protests, and went to his private garage. Instead of his usual luxury car, he pulled out old clothes he'd kept from his college days. Looking in the mirror, he barely recognized himself, in the worn jeans and faded hoodie. Perfect. He'd spend one day on the streets just to understand Emily's world better, just to see what she saw. What he didn't know was that this decision would unravel everything he thought he knew about wealth, happiness, and human connection. As he stepped out of his building through a back entrance, looking like any other person, on the street, Daniel Reed, billionaire tech mogul, disappeared. And for the first time in years, he felt truly seen. The city looked different from ground level. The towering buildings that had once represented his success now cast long, cold shadows. He walked toward the area where he knew from Emily's descriptions she usually stayed. His heart pounded with each step. What would he learn? What would he see? And most importantly, what would he do with that knowledge? Little did he know, this was just the beginning of a story that would shake the foundations of both their worlds. Human nature has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. Sometimes the richest gifts come wrapped in rags, and the truest connections form in the most unlikely places. As Daniel walked deeper into the city's forgotten corners, He was about to discover that sometimes you have to lose everything to find what really matters. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows between the buildings. Daniel's journey into Emily's world was about to begin, and with it, a story of transformation that would touch not just their lives, but the lives of countless others in ways neither of them could imagine. Daniel's first hours on the street opened his eyes in ways he never expected. People walked past him as if he were invisible. Store owners shooed him away from their doorsteps. The same coffee shop where he usually bought his premium roast coffee wouldn't even let him use the bathroom. "Move along," a security guard said, waving him away from a bench where he tried to rest. "You can't stay here." For the first time in his life, Daniel felt what it was like to be unwanted. His stomach growled. He hadn't eaten since morning, and he realized he hadn't brought any money. That would have defeated the purpose. He was starting to understand why Emily's messages often talked about finding warm places to stay more than finding food. Then he saw her. Emily sat on a piece of cardboard near the old bookstore, just as she'd described in their chats. Her brown hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, and despite the cold, she wore only a thin jacket. But what struck Daniel most was her expression. Tired but kind, worn but not broken. He watched as a young boy, couldn't have been more than 16, approached her. The boy looked lost, scared, probably new to the streets. "Hey," Emily said gently. "You look hungry." She reached into her backpack and pulled out half a sandwich, the one she'd mentioned getting from the church. "Here, but don't you need it?" the boy asked. "We all need to eat," Emily smiled. "I'm Emily. What's your name?" "Tommy," the boy replied, taking the sandwich with trembling hands. "Well, Tommy, first rule of the streets. We look out for each other. There's a shelter 3 blocks down that still has beds available tonight. Tell them Emily sent you." Daniel felt his throat tighten. Here was Emily, with barely anything to her name, sharing what little she had. He thought about the lunch meeting. He'd cancelled today, a $500 per plate charity fundraiser where rich people patted themselves on the back for giving away pocket change. A well-dressed woman walked past, dropping some coins near Emily. "Get yourself some food, dear," she said without making eye contact. "Thank you," Emily replied warmly. She immediately shared the coins with Tommy. "Get yourself something hot to drink." As the day went on, Daniel observed more of Emily's interactions. She helped an elderly homeless man find his lost cart. She warned a young girl away from some men who were clearly trouble, all while dealing with her own hunger and cold. Then something happened that changed everything. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb. A man in an expensive suit stepped out. Daniel recognized him as James Morton, one of his company's board members. "Emily," Morton called out, "I've been looking for you." Daniel's heart stopped. What was Morton doing here? "I don't know you," Emily said cautiously. "But I know about you." Morton smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "Your online friend Daniel. He's not who you think he is. He's actually Daniel Reed, the tech billionaire, and I have a proposition for you." Daniel watched Emily's face pale. Her hands started shaking. "I don't understand," she said. "It's simple," Morton continued. "We'll pay you $1 million to go to the press with a story about how Daniel Reed led you on, played with your emotions. His company's stock would take a hit, and certain people would benefit. You'd never have to sleep on the streets again." Emily stood up, her voice stronger than Daniel expected. "I don't care who Daniel really is. He's my friend. I won't hurt him for money." Morton's smile disappeared. "Don't be stupid, girl. Look at where you are. Look at your life. He's been lying to you all along." "Maybe he had his reasons," Emily said firmly. "The answer is no. Please leave." As Morton's car drove away, Daniel watched Emily sink back down onto her cardboard, tears in her eyes. She pulled out her phone, his last message from that morning still on the screen. "I wish you could see yourself the way I see you," she typed. "Money doesn't make someone good or bad. It's what's in their heart that matters." Daniel felt tears running down his own cheeks. In one day, he'd seen more humanity, more dignity, more true wealth of spirit than he'd seen in years of board meetings and charity galas. He knew what he had to do, but first, he needed to make some calls. Emily's dream of a bookstore cafe where people could find warmth and hope That wasn't just a dream anymore. It was about to become reality. But as he walked away to put his plan in motion, he didn't notice Morton's car circling back around the block. The board member had other plans, and Emily's refusal had just made things more complicated. The sun was setting on the city, and with it, the pieces were being set for a battle that would test not just Emily's resilience, but Daniel's courage, to stand up against the very world he'd helped create. That night, Daniel paced in his penthouse, still wearing his dirty street clothes. His expensive shoes had left trails of mud on the marble floor, but he didn't care. His mind was racing with everything he'd seen, especially Morton's threat to Emily. "Sarah," he called his assistant through the intercom, "get me everything you can find on James Morton's recent stock trades and board meeting votes. And I mean everything." "Sir?" Sarah's voice crackled through the speaker. "It's nearly midnight. Now, Sarah, it's important." Meanwhile, across the city, Emily couldn't sleep. She sat in her usual spot, staring at her phone. Daniel, the real Daniel Reed, had been all over the news. His face was on magazine covers in the convenience store windows. How had she not recognized him? Her phone buzzed. "Emily, we need to talk." It was Daniel. Her hands shook as she typed back, "Are you really him?" "Yes. And I need to explain. Not through messages. In person. Please." Emily looked around the dark street. Was Morton watching? "How do I know this isn't a trap?" "Because I spent today watching you share your sandwich with Tommy. I saw you turn down Morton's money. I saw the real you, Emily. Now, I need you to see the real me." Emily's heart stopped. He had been there? "The man in the old hoodie," she typed. "That was you?" "Yes, please meet me at St. Mark's Church. You'll be safe there. Father Michael knows me, the real me. He's been running my charitable foundation for years." At the church, Father Michael was waiting when Emily arrived. His kind face put her at ease. "Daniel called me," he said. "He's in the back office. Don't worry, child. You're safe here." When Emily walked into the office, she almost didn't recognize Daniel. He was still in his street clothes, his hair messy, his face tired, but his eyes, they were the same kind eyes she'd imagined during their chats. "I'm so sorry," he started. "Why?" Emily asked. "Why pretend to be someone else?" Daniel sat heavily, in an old wooden chair. "At first, I was just curious. Your posts in the online support group were so honest, so real. Everyone in my life wants something from me. But you just wanted to talk. So I was some kind of experiment?" Emily's voice cracked. "No. You were the first real thing in my life in years. Do you know what I saw today? I saw you give away food when you were hungry. I saw you protect others when you needed protection yourself. You showed me what real wealth looks like, Emily." Before Emily could respond, Father Michael burst into the room. "Daniel, turn on the news." On the small TV in the corner, James Morton was giving a press conference outside the Reed Technologies building. "It is with great concern that I must announce evidence of serious financial misconduct by Daniel Reed," Morton was saying. "The board has called an emergency meeting to discuss his immediate removal as CEO." Daniel's phone exploded with messages. His lawyer, his PR team, the board members still loyal to him. Everyone wanted answers. "He's making his move," Daniel said quietly. "He's been planning this for months. Today just gave him the perfect opportunity." "What will you do?" Emily asked. Daniel looked at her, really looked at her. "What would you do if someone tried to take everything you had?" Emily smiled sadly. "I lost everything once already. It taught me that the only things worth keeping are the things money can't buy." Father Michael cleared his throat. "Daniel, there's something you should know about Emily. Before she was homeless, I was an accountant," Emily finished quietly. "Had a small firm, until I reported my boss for fraud. They destroyed my reputation, blacklisted me. I lost my job, my apartment, everything." Daniel stood up suddenly. "That's it. Emily, you know numbers. You can spot fraud. Morton's been embezzling. I know it, but I can't prove it. Help me." "Me?" Emily looked shocked. "But I'm just—" "You're exactly who I need. Someone honest. Someone who knows what it's like to stand up for what's right, no matter the cost." Father Michael smiled. The Lord does work in mysterious ways. Just then Daniel's phone rang. It was Sarah. "Sir, you need to see this. I found something in Morton's records, but I think someone's following me." Daniel's face went pale. "Sarah, get out of the office. Now, get to the church." But the line went dead. Emily saw the fear in Daniel's eyes. "Your assistant? What floor is her office on?" 42nd. Why? Emily was already heading for the door. "Because I lived on the streets for a year. I know every back alley, every service entrance, every blind spot the security cameras don't. Catch? If Morton's men are watching the front entrance," Daniel grabbed his coat, "then we'll take the back way in." As they slipped out into the night, Father Michael watched them go. "Be careful," he whispered, "both of you." The old priest had seen many strange things in his years of service, but this might be the first time he'd witnessed a homeless woman and a billionaire heading off together to save a company. Then again, God had always had a soft spot for unlikely heroes. What none of them knew was that Sarah wasn't the only one in danger. Morton's plan was bigger than just taking over the company. And somewhere in the city, Tommy, the young boy Emily had helped, was clutching a piece of paper he'd found. A paper that could change everything. The night air was cold as Emily led Daniel through a maze of service alleys behind Reed Technologies. Her feet knew every crack in the pavement, every hidden passage between buildings. For once, her life on the streets was an advantage. "There," she whispered, pointing to a service entrance. "The cleaning crew uses this door. The camera above it has been broken for months." Daniel looked at her with newfound respect. "How do you know all this?" "When you're homeless, you learn to be invisible. You watch, you notice things others don't." Emily tried the door. "It's locked." Daniel pulled out his phone. Not for long. A few taps later, the security system beeped and the door clicked open. Being the boss has some perks, they slipped. Inside into the warm darkness of the service corridor. Emily's heart was pounding. Just yesterday, she'd been sleeping on cardboard. Now she was breaking into a billion-dollar company with its CEO. "Sarah's office is on 42, Daniel whispered. "But we should check the security office first, see what we're up against." The security office was on the second floor. Through its window, they could see two guards watching monitors, but something wasn't right. "Those aren't my regular guards," Daniel frowned. "Morton must have brought in his own people." Emily touched his arm. "Look at the monitor on the left. Is that Sarah?" On the screen, they could see Sarah trapped in a conference room, two men in suits standing guard outside. She was frantically working on a computer. "They're making her transfer files," Daniel growled, "trying to hide their tracks." "We need a distraction," Emily said. Then she smiled. "And I know just who to call." She pulled out her phone and sent a quick text. 10 minutes later, a group of homeless people gathered outside the building's main entrance. Leading them was Tommy. "Security!" Tommy shouted. "We demand to speak to James Morton. We know what he did." The guards at the front desk rushed to deal with the commotion. On the security monitors, they could see the confusion spreading. "Your homeless friends," Daniel said, amazed. "They're creating a diversion." "We look out for each other," Emily replied. "Now come on." They took the service elevator to the 40th floor, then climbed 2 flights of stairs. The hallway to the conference room was empty. The guards had gone to deal with the chaos downstairs. Sarah's eyes widened when they burst in. "Mr. Reed, thank God!" "What did they make you do?" Daniel asked, rushing to the computer. "Morton's been stealing millions," Sarah explained, her hands shaking. "He set up fake charity foundations, been funneling money through them for years. He made me transfer the proof to his private server, then delete everything here." Emily sat at the computer. "Nothing's ever really deleted, not if you know where to look." Her fingers flew over the keyboard. "I used to recover deleted files all the time at my old accounting job." Suddenly the lights went out. Emergency lights cast an eerie red glow through the office. "They're onto us," Daniel said. "Too late," Emily smiled, holding up a flash drive. "I got it. Every transaction, every fake foundation, every penny Morton stole." Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. "Find them!" Morton's voice boomed. "We need to get out of here," Sarah whispered. Emily led them to a maintenance door. "The garbage chute is through here. It leads to the loading dock." The garbage chute. Daniel looked horrified. Emily grinned. "What's wrong, Mr. Billionaire? Afraid to get your hands dirty?" Before he could answer, the conference room door burst open. Morton and his men rushed in. "The chute it is!" Daniel grabbed Emily's hand, and they ran. The slide down was fast and terrifying. They landed in a pile of cardboard boxes, Sarah screaming, all the way down. But they were alive. Tommy was waiting at the loading dock with a borrowed delivery van. "Need a ride?" As they sped away, Emily looked at the flash drive in her hand. "We've got him." But Morton's voice on the car radio made their victory feel hollow. Breaking news: Daniel Reed, CEO of Reed Technologies, is now wanted for questioning in connection with a massive charity fraud scheme. Daniel's face hardened. "He's trying to frame me." "Not if I can help it," Emily said, "but we need somewhere safe to go, somewhere Morton would never look." Daniel turned to her. "Your world, the streets, it's the last place they'd expect to find a billionaire." Emily squeezed his hand. "Welcome to my office, Mr. Reed." As the van disappeared into the night, Morton stood at his office window, furious. He picked up his phone. Find them, whatever it takes. But he didn't know what Daniel was just learning, that sometimes the strongest armor isn't made of money or power, but of the loyalty of people who have nothing left to lose. In the back of the van, Sarah looked at the unlikely pair, the billionaire and the homeless woman. "What now?" "Now," Emily said, "we show Morton what real power looks like." Thunder rolled across the city sky, promising a storm. But for the first time in a long time, neither Daniel nor Emily was afraid of what tomorrow might bring. They had something stronger than money or status. They had the truth and each other. The old abandoned church basement wasn't much, but it was safe. Emily had discovered it months ago, a forgotten space beneath St. Augustine's, where the homeless community sometimes gathered during the worst winter nights. Now it served as their hideout. "Home sweet home," Emily said, lighting some candles. The space was surprisingly clean, with old furniture the community had salvaged over time. Daniel looked around in amazement. "How long have you had this place?" "It's not mine," Emily explained. "It belongs to all of us. We take care of each other here." Sarah sat heavily on an old couch, still shaking from their escape. "The news is everywhere. They're saying terrible things about you, Mr. Reed." Daniel pulled out his phone. Every news channel was running Morton's story. His face was plastered everywhere, labeled as a fraud who stole from his own charities. "We can't stay hidden forever," Sarah said. "We don't have to," Emily replied, pulling out her laptop, a gift from a college student who'd once stayed in the basement. "We just need enough time to go through these files." Tommy came running down the stairs. "Got the food you asked for, Emily?" He was carrying bags of sandwiches and coffee. "And something else. You need to see this." He pulled out a crumpled paper from his pocket, the one he'd found earlier. It was a letter, marked with Morton's letterhead. Daniel read it, and his face went pale. "This is a letter to my brother Robert. Morton was working with him the whole time." "Your brother?" Emily asked. "Robert was always jealous that I inherited control of the company from our father. He's been trying to take over for years." Daniel sank into a chair. "My own brother." Emily touched his shoulder gently. "Family isn't always about blood, Daniel. Sometimes it's about who stands by you when you have nothing." Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Understanding, trust, maybe something more. Sarah cleared her throat. Guys, you should see this." On Emily's laptop, she had pulled up the files from the flash drive. Pages of transactions scrolled past, millions of dollars moving through fake charities into offshore accounts. "Morton wasn't just stealing from the company," Emily said, her accountant's mind piecing it together. "He was stealing from real charities, taking money meant for homeless shelters, food banks, children's hospitals. That's why he was so interested in you," Daniel realized. "If word got out that I was talking to a homeless woman, he could use it to discredit me when this all came to light. Make it look like I was the one stealing from charities." Suddenly, Father Michael appeared at the top of the stairs. "Daniel, Emily, turn on the news, quickly." On Emily's laptop, they pulled up a live news feed. Robert Reed was standing at a podium outside Reed Technologies. "It breaks my heart to reveal this about my own brother," Robert was saying, his face a mask of fake concern. "But we have evidence that Daniel has been embezzling from our charitable foundation for years. The board has voted to remove him as CEO. I'm being installed as interim chief executive to protect the company's interests." "He's taking everything," Daniel whispered. But Emily was smiling. "No, he's getting desperate. Look at the date on that. Letter Tommy found. Robert and Morton started planning this before you and I ever met online. They couldn't have known about me then. Which means..." Sarah caught on. "Which means they're lying about everything," Emily finished. "We just need to prove it." A commotion upstairs caught their attention. Heavy footsteps echoed through the church. "Morton's men," Tommy whispered. "They're searching the neighborhood." "We need to move," Daniel said. "No," Emily stood up. "We need to fight back. I lost everything once because I was afraid to stand up to powerful men. Not this time." She turned to Tommy. "Get everyone together, all our people from the streets. I need their help." "What are you planning?" Daniel asked. Emily's eyes sparkled with determination. "Morton thinks the homeless are invisible. That's his weakness. We see everything, hear everything, and every single one of us has a phone with a camera." Understanding dawned on Daniel's face. "We're going to use their invisibility against them." "Exactly. While Morton's men are searching for us, our people will be watching them, recording them, following the money." Sarah pulled out her phone. "I still have access to the company's internal messaging system. I can track their movements, tell our people where to look." Father Michael smiled. "I'll spread the word to other churches, shelters. We'll all help." For the first time since this began, Daniel felt hope. He looked at Emily with admiration. She had lost everything once, but never lost her spirit, her dignity, her humanity. "Emily," he said softly, "when this is over," she put a finger to his lips, "first we fight, then we talk about tomorrow." But tomorrow had its own plans, because at that moment, Robert Reed was meeting with someone else, someone from Emily's past, someone who knew exactly why she'd ended up on the streets. And that person had just made a phone call that would change everything. The war for Reed Technologies was about to become a battle for survival itself. Thunder crashed outside, and in the candlelight of their underground sanctuary, Emily and Daniel prepared for the fight of their lives. But they had something Morton, Robert, and all their money couldn't buy: the loyalty of those who had nothing left to lose but their dignity. "You'll never guess who I just found." Robert Reed smiled as he walked into Morton's office. The city lights twinkled behind him like cold stars. Morton looked up from his computer. "This better be good. We're running out of time before the shareholders' meeting. Remember Anderson and Blake, accounting." Robert pulled out an old newspaper clipping. "The firm that went under 2 years ago after a massive fraud scandal." Morton's eyes widened as he read. "Emily Carter. She was the whistleblower." Not just any whistleblower. Robert's smile grew colder. She was going to expose a connection between Anderson and Blake and certain offshore accounts that we're using right now. Why didn't she? Because Marcus Blake made sure she'd never be believed. He destroyed her reputation, her career, her life. Robert tossed another photo on the desk. And guess who just made parole? Morton picked up the photo of Marcus Blake leaving prison. Find him. Meanwhile, in the church basement, Emily was organizing their resistance. The homeless community had become their eyes and ears across the city. Every suspicious meeting, every late-night office visit, every suspicious package, all photographed and documented. "Look at this." Tommy showed them a photo on his phone. Morton's men moving boxes out of the office at 3 a.m. "They're destroying." "Evidence?" Sarah said. Daniel was pacing. "The shareholders' meeting is in 2 days. Once they vote to confirm Robert as CEO, it'll be too late." Emily was about to respond when her phone buzzed. The color drained from her face as she read the message. "Emily?" Daniel touched her arm. "What's wrong?" "Marcus Blake is out of prison," her voice shook, "and he's in the city." "Who's Marcus Blake?" Sarah asked. Emily sank into a chair. "The man who destroyed my life." Daniel sat beside her. "Tell us." 2 years ago, I was working at Anderson and Blake Accounting. I found irregularities in some accounts, millions being moved through fake charities into offshore accounts. She looked at Daniel. just like what Morton's doing now. The same scheme, Daniel realized. Emily nodded. I was going to report it, but Marcus Blake found out. He framed me for theft, forged documents with my signature. When I tried to fight back, he threatened my family. My little sister was in college. He said he'd ruin her life too. Tears rolled down her face. So I ran, disappeared, ended up on the streets. It was the only way to protect my sister. Daniel pulled her close. Why didn't you tell me? Because for the first time in 2 years when I was talking to you, I felt like myself again. Not a victim, not a homeless woman, just me. Sarah, who had been typing furiously on her laptop, suddenly gasped. Oh my God! Emily, look at these accounts from the flash drive, the routing numbers, and they're the same ones from Anderson and Blake. Morton and Blake were working together all along. Daniel stood up. That's why they were so interested in you, Emily. You were getting close to exposing their whole network. Just then, Tommy came running down the stairs. Emily, there are men outside asking questions about you. One of them, they're showing your picture around. Emily's phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from an unknown number. Time. To finish what we started, Miss Carter. Your sister says hello. They found Amy. Emily's voice broke. No, no, no. Daniel took her hand. We'll protect her. I promise. How? You've lost everything too. Not everything. Daniel pulled out his phone. There's one person in my family I can still trust. My mother. Eleanor Reed had been quietly watching the scandal unfold from her country estate. When Daniel's call came, she wasn't surprised. Daniel, darling, I was wondering when you'd call. Mum, I need your help. Someone's in danger. Amy Carter, yes? Your brother's men aren't as discreet as they think. She's already here with me. Emily grabbed the phone. Amy's with you? She's safe? Quite safe, dear. Eleanor Reed. You must be Emily. Daniel's father had a nose for business, but I have a nose for character. When I saw what they were saying about my son, I knew something was wrong. Then I remembered a similar scandal from 2 years ago. Mrs. Reed, Emily said, the evidence we have, it connects everything. Morton, Blake, the fake charities, all of it. Then perhaps it's time for me to call an emergency board meeting. As the largest individual shareholder, I still have that right. Hope flickered in Daniel's eyes. Mum, I could kiss you. Save it for Emily, darling. She seems much more deserving. Bring your evidence to the estate and hurry. Marcus Blake was asking questions in town. As they prepared to leave their sanctuary, Emily pulled Daniel aside. Why did you really come to the streets that day? The truth. Daniel touched her face gently. Because in all our messages, you never once talked about what you'd lost. Only what you hoped to build. That kind of strength, I needed to understand it. And now I understand that true wealth isn't in what you have. It's in what you're willing to fight for. Their moment was interrupted by Sarah's urgent voice. They found us. Morton's men are inside the church. As footsteps thundered above, Emily squeezed Daniel's hand. Ready to run? He smiled. With you always. But Marcus Blake was already ahead of them, waiting in the shadows. The past was about to collide with the present, and not everyone would walk away unscathed. The storm that had been threatening finally broke over the city, and with it came a night that would change everything. Rain pounded against the church. Windows as Emily, Daniel, and Sarah crouched in the darkness of the basement. Above them, heavy footsteps moved through the church. Back door, Emily whispered. Through the old confessional. They crept through the narrow passage, Emily leading the way. Years of navigating the city's forgotten spaces had taught her well, but as they reached the door, a familiar voice froze. Her blood. Hello, Emily. Marcus Blake stepped out of the shadows, his prison-pale face gleaming in the darkness. Miss me? Daniel stepped in front of Emily protectively. Stay away from her. Mr. Reed, Blake smiled. Or should I say, former CEO? Interesting company you're keeping these days. Sarah had slipped into the shadows, phone in hand, recording everything. You destroyed my life. Emily's voice shook with anger. You and Morton, stealing from charities, destroying anyone who got in your way. Destroyed your life, Blake laughed. I gave you a choice. You chose to be noble. How did that work out for you? Better than prison worked out for you, Emily shot back. Blake's smile vanished. He pulled out a gun. Speaking of choices, here's one now. Come with me to see Morton or I start making phone calls about your sister. My sister is safe, Emily said. Mrs. Reed is protecting her. For the first time, Blake looked uncertain, but then another voice came from behind them. She's not the only one who needs protecting. Robert Reed emerged from the shadows, his own gun trained on them. Hello, little brother. Robert, Daniel's voice was cold. Still fighting Dad's battles, still trying to prove you deserve his company. His company, Robert's face twisted. He gave it to you, his precious younger son, the visionary, while I did all the work. The work? Daniel laughed bitterly. You mean stealing from children's hospitals? Working with criminals like Blake? Enough. Blake shouted. We're all taking a little trip to see Morton now. But Blake had forgotten about Sarah. In the chaos, she'd managed to send their location to Tommy and the others. Suddenly, the back door burst open. A flood of homeless people poured in, led by Tommy and Father Michael. Get them, Robert shouted. But he and Blake were quickly overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Run, Tommy yelled to Emily and Daniel. We've got this. They ran into the storm, Sarah close behind them. Thunder crashed overhead as they raced through flooded streets. Robert's men were in pursuit, headlights cutting through the rain behind them. The subway. Emily pulled them down into an abandoned station she knew. There's a maintenance tunnel that leads uptown. They splashed through dark tunnels, rats scurrying away from their footsteps. Sarah's phone provided the only light. Wait. Sarah stopped suddenly. Look at this message. Eleanor Reed had texted, Morton's men watching all roads to estate. Taking private helicopter to pick you up. Meet at the old Carson factory helipad in 30 minutes. Mum always did have style. Daniel managed a grim smile. The Carson factory was 15 blocks away. Above ground, Robert's men were searching everywhere. But Emily knew a better way. The old steam tunnels, she said. They run all the way uptown. Most people don't even know they exist. Daniel squeezed her hand. Lead the way. They moved through the city's underground arteries, Emily navigating by memory and instinct. Every sound echoed ominously. Dripping water, distant trains, and somewhere behind them, pursuing footsteps. Emily, Daniel said as they climbed through a maintenance shaft, if we make it through this, when, she corrected him, when we make it through this. When we make it through this, I want to show you something. The empty building, next to the public library. The one with the broken windows. I used to sleep in the doorway sometimes. I bought it last month. I was thinking, it would make a perfect bookstore cafe. The kind where anyone could come in, get warm, feel human. Emily stopped climbing. Daniel, I'm not doing it for you, he said quickly. I'm doing it because of you. Because you showed me what real change looks like. Sarah called down from above. Guys, romantic confessions later. Escape now. They emerged into the rain near the Carson factory. The old helipad was on the roof, 6 stories up. But as they started climbing the fire escape, headlights appeared at both ends of the street. Robert's voice boomed through a megaphone. It's over, Daniel. Come quietly, and maybe the board will be lenient. The board. Eleanor Reed's voice cut. Through the night, the helicopter appeared above them, spotlights blazing. I think the board will be very interested in tonight's events. Robert raised his gun. Mother, don't interfere. Or what, darling? You'll shoot your own mother. Marcus Blake may be willing to kill for money, but are you? The helicopter descended. Toward the helipad. They were almost there. Just one more flight of stairs. Then a shot rang out. Sarah screamed. Daniel stumbled. Blood spread across his shirt. Daniel! Emily caught him as he fell against the railing. His eyes were glazed with pain. Keep going. Get the evidence to Mom. I'm not leaving you, Emily said fiercely. The helicopter was landing. Eleanor Reed stood in the doorway, her elegant figure silhouetted against the storm. Below, police sirens wailed in the distance. Sarah's last message had reached them, but Robert was climbing the fire escape after them. Blake's men were in the building coming up the stairs. They were trapped between 2 threats with a wounded man who could barely stand. Emily looked at the gap between the fire escape and the helipad. 10 feet of empty air, 6 stories up. An impossible jump. Unless... "Do you trust me?" she asked Daniel. He managed a weak smile. "With everything." Thunder crashed overhead, and Emily Carter, the woman who had lost everything and found something greater, prepared to make a decision that would change all their lives forever. The night wasn't over, and neither was their story. "Sarah," Emily called over the howling wind, "help me with his jacket." They quickly tied Daniel's jacket into a makeshift rope, securing one end to the fire escape railing. Emily's years on the street had taught her how to make something from nothing, how to find strength in desperate moments. "Mom," Daniel's voice was weak. "The flash drive is safe," Emily assured him, pulling it from her pocket. She pressed it into Sarah's hands. "Get this to Mrs. Reed, no matter what happens." Sarah's eyes widened. "What are you going to do?" Below them, Robert and his men were getting closer. Blake's voice echoed up the metal stairs. "Nowhere left to run." Emily looked at Daniel, then at the gap to the helipad. "Something crazy." She positioned herself behind Daniel, wrapping her arms around his waist. "When I say now, we jump." "You're insane," Sarah gasped. "Maybe," Emily smiled. "But sometimes insanity is all we have left." Eleanor Reed watched from the helicopter, understanding dawning on her face. She moved to the controls, repositioning the aircraft slightly, its powerful downdraft creating a buffer against the building. "Emily," Daniel mumbled, his consciousness fading. "If we don't make it, save it for when we're safe," she whispered in his ear. "I have plans for that bookstore." Robert reached the landing below them, gun raised. "It's over! Now!" Emily shouted. They jumped. Time seemed to slow. The wind caught them, Eleanor's strategic positioning of the helicopter creating an updraft that helped carry them those crucial few feet. They crashed onto the helipad, Emily taking the brunt of the impact to protect Daniel's wounded shoulder. Sarah scrambled through the gap after them, the flash drive clutched tightly in her hand. "Get them inside," Eleanor shouted over the storm. Robert fired, but the helicopter's spotlights blinded him. His shots went wide. As they pulled Daniel into the aircraft, police cars surrounded the building below. Robert and Blake found themselves trapped, caught between the approaching officers and the evidence of their crimes hovering above them. "Daniel?" Emily cradled his head in her lap as the helicopter lifted off. "Stay with me." His eyes fluttered open. "Not going anywhere. Someone has to help you design that cafe." Eleanor Reed watched them with tears in her eyes. In that moment, she saw something she'd feared her younger son had lost: his heart. "St. Mary's Hospital," she instructed the pilot. "They have a helipad and the best trauma unit in the city." Sarah was already on the phone with the police, coordinating the arrests below. On her laptop, she began uploading copies of the evidence to secure servers, insurance against any last-minute attempts to bury the truth. "Mrs. Reed," Emily said suddenly. "The shareholders' meeting is in 6 hours," Eleanor finished. "Don't worry, dear. While the boys were playing with guns, I was calling in favors. The board members are already gathering. But Daniel needs surgery," Emily protested. "And the company needs its true leader," Eleanor smiled, "which is why we're going to do both." The helicopter landed at St. Mary's, where a trauma team was waiting. As they rushed Daniel into surgery, Eleanor took charge. "Sarah, get that evidence organized into a presentation. Emily, dear, come with me. But Daniel, we'll be fine. Right now, we need to get you ready to face the board." Emily looked down at her ragged clothes. "Me? You're the one who uncovered everything. You're the one who never gave up. And," Eleanor's eyes twinkled, "you're the one my son loves." In Eleanor's private office at the hospital, a garment bag waited. Inside was a simple but elegant suit. "I had it sent over," Eleanor explained. "A woman should have armor when she goes into battle." As Emily changed, Eleanor studied her. "You know, I met Daniel's father when I was a waitress. Everyone thought he was crazy marrying beneath his class, but he saw something in me that others didn't." "What was that?" "Steel, the same thing I see in you." Eleanor helped Emily with her hair. Robert was always so obsessed with proving himself worthy of his father's legacy. But Daniel got his father's vision, and now he has something his father had too, someone who loves him for himself, not his bank account. Emily touched the simple silver necklace Eleanor handed her. "I haven't told him." "You don't have to. It's written all over your face every time you look at him." A nurse appeared at the door. "Mrs. Reed, your son is out of surgery. The bullet missed anything vital. He's asking for Emily." Daniel lay pale but alert in the recovery room. His eyes lit up when Emily walked in. "For a minute there," he said softly, "I thought I was hallucinating a guardian angel." Emily took his hand. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got shot and jumped off a building. But mostly," he squeezed her hand, "mostly I'm feeling grateful." "For what?" "For whatever twist of fate made me click on your post that day. For giving me the courage to walk the streets in rags. For showing me what real strength looks like." Emily leaned down and kissed him softly. "Save your strength. We have a shareholders meeting to win." "We?" "Yes, we. Your mother thinks it's time for Reed Technologies to hear from the woman who uncovered the truth. Unless you object." Daniel smiled. "Object?" "Emily, I've never been more certain of anything in my life." As she left his room to prepare for the meeting, Emily passed a TV in the hallway. Breaking news showed Robert and Blake being led away in handcuffs. But there was something else. Footage from the homeless community, hundreds of videos and photos showing Morton's conspiracy. The invisible people had been watching all along, and now, finally, they would be heard. In his office across town, Morton watched the same footage with growing horror. He reached for his phone to call his lawyer, but it was too late. The truth was already out there, and it was heading straight for the shareholders' meeting, wearing a simple suit and carrying years of determination in its heart. The storm outside had finally passed, but the real thunder was about to break in the Reed Technologies boardroom. The Reed Technologies boardroom buzzed with tension. Shareholders and board members whispered among themselves as they took their seats around the massive oak table. News of the night's events had spread quickly. Daniel Reed's shooting, Robert Reed's arrest, and rumors of a massive conspiracy. James Morton sat at the head of the table, trying to project confidence. But his eyes kept darting to the door, knowing what was coming. At exactly 9 a.m., Eleanor Reed entered. The room fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying authority that came from decades as the Reed family matriarch. "Before we vote on the future of this company, there's someone you need to hear from." Emily walked in and Morton's face went pale. Gone were her ragged clothes and uncertain demeanor. In their place stood a woman whose eyes held both compassion and steel. "Who is this?" demanded George Peterson, one of the senior board members. "This," Eleanor smiled, "is the woman who uncovered the truth about what's really been happening to our company's charitable foundations." Sarah dimmed the lights and started the presentation. On the massive screen, transaction records appeared. Millions of dollars flowing through fake charities into offshore accounts. "Mr. Morton," Emily's voice was clear and strong, "would you like to explain why donations meant for children's hospitals were diverted to accounts controlled by Marcus Blake?" Morton stood up. "This is ridiculous. Who are you to make these accusations?" "My name is Emily Carter. 2 years ago, I was an accountant at Anderson and Blake. I discovered similar fraudulent transactions there. For trying to expose the truth, I lost everything." She looked directly at Morton. "But you knew that already, didn't you? That's why you panicked when Daniel Reed started talking to me online." The boardroom erupted in murmurs. "This is all very dramatic," Morton tried to laugh. "But where's Daniel Reed? Shouldn't he be here making these accusations?" "My son," Eleanor's voice cut through the chaos, "is recovering from the bullet your conspirators put in him, but he's watching." She gestured to a large screen where Daniel's face appeared via video call from his hospital room. "The evidence is conclusive," Daniel said. "Morton, along with my brother Robert and Marcus Blake, has been stealing from our charitable foundation for years. The police have already arrested Robert and Blake. Morton is next." "You have no proof," Morton shouted. "Actually," Sarah stepped forward with her laptop, "we have something better than proof. We have witnesses." She played a compilation of videos taken by the homeless community. Morton's late-night meetings, suspicious deliveries, conversations about bribes and threats. The people you thought were invisible? Emily said. They saw everything. The boardroom doors opened again. 2 police officers entered. James Morton, one officer said. You're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. As they led Morton away, Emily turned to the shareholders. Reed Technologies was built on Daniel's father's vision of using technology to connect people, to make lives better. But somewhere along the way, that vision was corrupted by greed. She took a deep breath. I've lived on the streets. I've seen what real need looks like, but I've also seen what real humanity looks like. The homeless community that helped expose this fraud, they share what little they have. They protect each other. They understand that true wealth isn't about money. It's about how we treat each other. Eleanor stepped forward. Which is why the Reed Foundation is being restructured. Emily Carter will be its new director, overseeing all charitable operations. The shareholders burst into applause. On the screen, Daniel beamed with pride, but Morton had one last card to play. As the officers led him past Emily, he stopped. Tell them, he sneered. Tell them about the real reason you left Anderson and Blake, about the money that went missing under your watch. Emily felt the room's energy shift. Doubt crept into some faces. You mean the money you stole using my login credentials? Emily smiled. The transactions you forged. Check your phones, everyone. Sarah just sent you Marcus Blake's signed confession, detailing exactly how they framed me. Morton's face crumpled. As the police led him away, Emily saw not a powerful executive, but a small man whose world of lies had finally crumbled. The vote that followed was unanimous. Daniel Reed would remain CEO, with Emily Carter joining the board as Director of Charitable Operations. After the meeting, Emily rushed back to the hospital. Daniel was sitting up in bed, looking stronger. You were amazing, he said, pulling her close. We were amazing, she corrected him. All of us. Your mother, Sarah, Tommy, the whole community. Speaking of community, Daniel reached for a folder by his bed. I had my lawyers draw these up this morning. The deed to the bookstore building and plans. For 5 more across the city. Places where anyone can come in from the cold, find warmth, hope, and maybe love. Emily's eyes sparkled. That too, Daniel smiled. Especially that. But outside the hospital room, Eleanor Reed was receiving a troubling phone call. Someone from Emily's past had surfaced. Someone who knew a secret that could destroy everything they'd built. The storm might have passed, but dark clouds were gathering on the horizon once again. This victory was just the beginning of an even greater challenge. After all, the greatest test of love isn't winning against the odds. It's what happens after the winning, when the real truth comes out. 3 months had passed since the dramatic shareholders' meeting. The spring sun shone brightly on the newly renovated building next to the public library. A crowd had gathered for the grand opening of Haven Books and Coffee, the first of what would become a chain of sanctuary spaces across the city. Emily stood nervously before the ribbon, Daniel's hand warm in hers. He had recovered fully from his wound, though he still carried the scar as a reminder of that stormy night. Ready? He whispered. Emily looked at the crowd. Tommy was there with dozens of their friends from the streets, all cleaned up and wearing Haven staff badges. Sarah stood with Eleanor Reed, both women beaming with pride. Father Michael waited to give the blessing. More than ready, Emily replied. As they cut the ribbon together, cheers erupted. Inside, the space was everything Emily had dreamed of. Warm wooden shelves filled with books, comfortable chairs, a cafe counter serving hot drinks and food, but most importantly, a sign hung prominently. All are welcome here. There's something. Helse? Daniel led her to a wall near the entrance. A plaque read, dedicated to those who taught us that true wealth lies in the kindness we share. Tears filled Emily's eyes. It's perfect. The day was filled with joy as people from all walks of life filled the space. Former homeless individuals, now employed as staff, served coffee with dignity. Children from the neighborhood curled up in reading nooks. Even some of the board members stopped by, clearly impressed by how their charitable investments were being put to use. But in her office upstairs, Eleanor Reed was troubled. She hung up her phone and turned to Sarah. It's confirmed, Eleanor said gravely. Jennifer Carter is back in the city. Sarah's eyes widened. Emily's mother, the one who... Yes, the one who helped Blake frame Emily in the first place. And she's asking questions about the Reed Foundation's new director. Meanwhile, Emily and Daniel had slipped away to the rooftop garden, another haven they'd created for their community. The city spread out before them, but it looked different now. Where Emily had once seen only cold streets and hostile spaces, she now saw possibility. "Penny for your thoughts?" Daniel asked. "I was just thinking about that first message you sent." "Me?" Emily smiled. "How different everything was then. Any regrets? Only that I didn't tell you something sooner." She turned to face him. "I love you, Daniel Reed. Not the billionaire, not the CEO, just you." Daniel pulled her close. "I love you too, Emily Carter, the woman who taught me that the greatest wealth is the love we give away." He dropped to one knee, pulling out a small box. Inside was a simple but elegant ring. "I'm not asking because of everything that's happened," he said. "I'm asking because I want to spend the rest of my life creating havens with you." "Emily Carter, will you—" "Yes," she whispered before he could finish. "Yes to all of it." Their kiss was interrupted by Sarah clearing her throat. "Sorry," she said, looking troubled, "but Mrs. Reed needs to see you both. Now." In Eleanor's office, the atmosphere was tense. "Emily, dear," Eleanor began gently, "there's something you need to know about your mother." Emily stiffened. "I haven't spoken to her since she helped Blake frame you," Eleanor finished. "Yes, we know. She was paid handsomely for her part in it. But now she's back, and she's threatening to go to the press with a different story." "What story?" Daniel demanded. "That Emily knew about the fraud at Anderson and Blake because she was part of it. That she only turned whistleblower when she didn't get her cut." Eleanor held up her hand as Daniel started to protest. "We know it's not true, but Jennifer Carter has forged documents that make it look convincing." Emily sank into a chair. "She's my mother. How could she—" "Money," Eleanor said simply. "Morton's associates are desperate to discredit you, to cast doubt on everything. That happened. They're using your mother to do it." Daniel knelt beside Emily. "We'll fight this together." Emily touched her new ring, then straightened her shoulders. "No, I ran once before when I was framed. I won't run again. My mother wants to tell stories about who I am. Fine. Let me show the world who I've become." Eleanor smiled proudly. "I was hoping you'd say that, because I have a plan." Outside Haven Books and Coffee, the sun was setting on their first day. The cafe was still full of people finding warmth, hope, and connection. A mother read to her children in one corner. A homeless man enjoyed a hot meal in another. This was the real story, not the lies Jennifer Carter was selling, but the truth of what love and determination could build. Emily and Daniel stood at the window, watching their dream in action. Whatever storm was coming, they would face it, together. After all, they had already weathered poverty and wealth, lies and truth, hatred and love. "Ready for another adventure?" Daniel asked. Emily squeezed his hand. "With you, always." The city lights began to twinkle as night fell. Somewhere out there, Jennifer Carter was plotting her daughter's downfall, but she didn't understand what. Emily had learned in her journey from the streets to the boardroom that true power doesn't come from destroying others, but from lifting them up. The Haven's lights glowed warmly in the gathering darkness, a beacon of hope for anyone who needed it. Just as Emily and Daniel had found each other across the divide of wealth and status, just as they had built bridges between two worlds, they would face this new challenge the same way, together, with love, truth, and the strength that comes from knowing your own worth. After all, some stories don't end with happily ever after. They end with the promise of more chapters to come, more battles to fight, and more love to share. Because the greatest stories, like the greatest loves, are the ones that remind us that beneath the rags or the riches, we are all just people, seeking warmth, hope, and a place to call home. And in each other, Emily and Daniel had found exactly that. The end.